Hello once again everyone, it's time for more Wallerstein. So last time we went over vor, indes, and nach, and today we're going to be going over the next couple plays which don't really have names. They do, but the biggest thing about them that kind of links them is that number one, they make extensive use of an elbow cut, which we're going to be going over, and then they also tend to come out of this new bind position, which we'll be going over. So joining me once again is Chase, always happy to be abused. So let's go ahead and go over how we're getting there. So when we last left off, we were in the scales, right? Now from here, we're going to have, he's going to wind up against me with the short edge, like so. Now if this is to happen, we actually will have other options when we get to the sword takings, but for now, what it recommends I do against this, if someone seeks to do this to you, is to meet them. So I'm also going to wind up with my short edge. So my thumb is standing below, and I'm engaged with the short edge against him. What this causes is now we're basically in the scales as we were before, but we're up here, right? Now the reason that this matters is because when we're in the scales below, right, we both have equal pressure here. We can play, we can try to get our tips online, everything's great. If he winds up against me, yes, I can still defend myself, but I always have this threat of him doing a Zwerkow or other things like that, because now he does stand with the thumb below. He also has the ability to slip off very quickly, and things of that nature. So yes, I can still fight him here, but it's not ideal. If I match him, now if he tries to run away from me or anything like that, my tip is immediately able to come in. If he tries to overpower me or something along those lines, it's very easy for me to resist. So this really can be thought of as the scale's inverse taller brother, right? And it's our first position that we're going to be going to that will then launch into the next couple techniques. Now, the way that you can know whether or not you have the advantage is going to be, you'll see your sword is basically above his. So if we do this, right, he goes up, I want to step slightly out to my side, and now from my perspective, my sword is physically above his, and from his perspective the same. This allows me to have control over him. So from here, I could, launch into a bunch of different stuff depending upon what I wanted to do. So make sure that you're turning that edge and really, keeping that sort of overbind going. Because as we know, overbinds is how you win. Now, that part's nice and simple, right? But that doesn't get you anything. It's just getting you used to training that reaction. So if, for example, I wasn't ready, I'm fully in the knot, he steps up against me and goes to do that wind, at the very least, I'm like, okay, from here I can do things. But it saved me is the important bit. The next play, which is going to teach us the stolen cue. Now, on that note, stolen cue, I'm not good enough at translating old German to give it a name that, I translated. Stolen cue is what it says on Wiktionary. It's kind of a fun one because it's just that quick little underneath elbow cut. So it's a fitting name in my opinion, but I can't speak for the accuracy of its translation. It's essentially just a low Zwerkow. So most people are pretty used to these. You can Zwerk to literally every direction of the clock except 6. This is going to be a Zwerkow coming up from about 7 or 8 o'clock. Now, strictly speaking, it doesn't necessarily say it has to be a Zwerk. They just describe it as a long edge cut from below. But since your thumb is already going to be on the blade, you just push on the pommel and step through, and it usually ends up as just a standard Unterhau, even if you had the thumb on. Now, to get there though, we're going to use this initial reaction to give him threat, to drive him high. So what's going to happen here is we'll come down into the scales, boom, as he goes to wind against me, I'm going to move in as I turn over. And this basically works like a butyrin, so the transmuting from high to low, and I've just stuck him in the face, right? So we'll show that from the other side real quick. So we come in, boom, he goes to wind against me. Exact same idea, I just move in, going to the same position as him, and I have a great shot at his face. This is a fantastic technique to get good at because it just lines up with their head all the time. And if they do try to raise their arms to defend, you just adjust to hitting them in the ribs. So against this, he is going to raise to try and protect his head. Not the best option in his part, but it's also the only thing that's going to keep him alive, right? So we come into the scales, boom, he goes to wind. I threaten, so he raises up his arms. Now I'm safe to go into my next part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push on the pommel, and I'm going to take my left foot, and I'm not going to step directly at him. I'm instead going to step crossways. Now you can think of this as kind of past him, so I'm not stepping fully off to this side. I want to fill the the gap kind of right here, or this line right next to him, so that way I'm just close enough that he can't resist it, lined up with his core, but not stepping directly at him and thus endangering my head. Because this is a cut to the elbow specifically, and it's unlikely I'm going to be shearing his limbs off. This is going to be a cut that stops. Most likely I'm going to thunk into his elbows and then my tip could go into his belly. Not going to stop him from trying to cleave my head. So I want to be moving at the same time to get out of that dangered area. So we come to the scales, he threatens, I threaten, he raises. I'm going to push on the pommel, and I'm going to cut through. I'm keeping my arms relatively extended. Now, if he raised high enough, I could also target, even into the face or into the belly. I'm still going to go for the arms, though, because what that allows me to do is if he tries to come down or anything, I feel it on my sword. That gives me that feedback loop, so I know, okay, I got to reinforce to protect myself as I keep going. Versus if I hew to the body, I may not feel him trying to come down. I can't necessarily guarantee that's why they chose to cut to the elbows. Personally, the reason I think it's a cut to the elbows is that some of the images, especially the later images, show when he goes to raise his arms, he moves out of this position to more like this, an almost kind of, posta breve, sort of shortened point position to really reinforce, in which case the elbow becomes a much more obvious target. Most times you do this against people, they're going to do what Chase did though and just panic raise. So it's really 6 1/2 dozen. But that's why I believe it's a cut to the elbows. Now, once you hit, you don't stop moving, right? I don't want to stay in front of him. We're here, he threatens, I threaten, he raises, boom, and from here I'm just going to keep going. And you might as well go ahead and get that schnappen onto the top of his head, right? You've hit 1, hit 2, okay? And all that's going to be is I've curled myself up, I'm just going to uncurl, crack him on the top of the head. Nice and simple. So I'll throw on my mask real quick, and we'll go over that a couple times. Okay, ready? And as you see, sometimes I have to modify what I hit. Sometimes his arms are high enough or I'm close enough that I end up hitting his body. I really don't mind. It's still taking the exact same opportunity, and as soon as I hit, I just keep stepping. I'm pulling the cut, but I'm just moving into this sort of middle, almost kind of flugish position, which when I finish, kind of leaves me right about here on his side, which is nice because if he tries to follow me, I have that physical barrier. Or if you're one of those people that prefers to spring out of it, you can hit with the tip and get some distance. That's just what I felt like doing today, honestly. But now let's talk about the next part. So that's relatively simple. I drive him up, he gets scared, I take off down below. No problem. Well, he does have a defense against this, and the defense is an interesting one because it harkens back to one of the plays we went over last week. So if you remember, last week we prompted the Zwerkow to come around. Let's do that real quick, right? So we came into the scales, and he raised, and I pushed that over, and the Zwerk was coming. If I was late on it, if I couldn't be underneath, I used the short edge to suppress, like this, right? Kind of almost a Krumpfhau motion, but not quite. In this case, when I'm coming up from below, the older images seem to indicate he's doing the exact same thing. I mean, it's already pre-built into the person's playbook. Why would they not use it against this cut? I don't necessarily believe it's the best defense. I'm constantly trying to get my guys to parry with their long edge on that side, but we will go over that again in a moment. So that's what I believe is happening, is we're coming into here, boom, I'm going to be the one who gets hit this time. I'm scaring him, he's raising up against me, and then scaring me. I'm going, oh no, he's trying to take off down below, and I'm preventing that by bringing my sword down, at which point I'm set up for doing the exact same thing we talked about in the knock, right? So we've got this sort of falling position again. Now, from there, what I'm going to do is once I make contact, I'm going to shove down with my crossguard, as is described. and I'm going to turn it over into a very narrow sort of schnappen, though I'll show you some variation at the end. So let's switch sides real quick to showcase this one. So, same setup, we're in scales, he raises, I scare him, he raises. I come from below, and this time, I'm probably going to step back as he does it, right, to get that distance. He's going to fall with the sword edge and prevent me from going at him. Now, I don't want him to get any opportunity to do anything, so I'm going to step up with my right foot. I'm going to push, I'm going to turn over, and it says to lay it against his throat and slice him. Now, the image in the older books shows it on this side. I don't know why. This is where it more naturally ends up, and this gives me better control. So I'm going with this, right? But I just roll off of it, boom, boom, and I've got great control of him. He's not in a position to really fight back against me, and has new priorities. Plus, not to mention, the sources tend to write for the ideal. In practice, you may end up hitting him center of the face, you may hit him on this side of the neck, you may hit him in the shoulder. The more you practice, the better your aim is, but all of those options are still a-okay from my perspective. So here is that once more. We're here, boom, he raises, I scare him, through, shove down, in. Nice and straightforward. Now, if you want to, you can do a modern modification of that, where instead of coming for the head, for the neck, I'm going to instead spring out and hit the head. I'll show that at the very end. For now, we'll go ahead and do as the book seems to describe. So let me throw on my mask again. Gotcha. Gotta be ready for that. Now I'll switch sides. Really pretty straightforward. The thing that I'm noticing at the moment, you're actually bringing your arms very down low. Try to keep them a little more extended. There we go. And the reason that matters is because more likely when you're fighting people, especially when you're first trying it out, they're gonna bring their arms lower because they're more worried about the cut coming upward. What that causes is when I come from below and he really shoots his arms downward, I don't have to worry about hooking at all or pushing. His head is perfectly open. If his arms are up a little bit higher though, now I do need to physically get that out of the way in order to hit them. So that is something to consider as time goes on. You may not always have to do the hooking, but it's probably coming up from someone being a little more extended as a fighter. So, out of this, we're now going to move into kind of our next big option, which is going to be the Ausser, right? And this one is a lot of fun. Ausser roughly translates to outer taking, and what this essentially is it's a duplirin, but it's a duplirin on the low line. And the first couple times you see it, you're like, no way that's going to happen. But I can personally attest that this one works because I've done it. In fact, pretty much everybody took to it really, really well when we went over it. So, what's going to happen here is the exact same setup as before. We're here, he raises, I raise, I cut from below as he gets some distance, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push my sword down and around. So I'm just keeping the contact we had. I'm pushing it around the sword as I step up with my right foot to then get the blade on the left side of his neck. Now, when you first look at this and when you first do it, you're going to be like, okay, I don't feel safe here. His sword is closer to me than mine is to him most times, right? And getting the blade to go around like that takes a little bit of practice. So we're going to get nice and close to the camera, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. So we'll just start from that cut from below, right? So I'm here. What I want to do is I want to think about where the swords are touching, okay? Don't try to think about aiming with the tip. Just think about the swords are touching there. Keep that pressure, and just move your pommel down and around, and it will naturally guide to where it needs to go. Like with most things, the less you try to aim it and force it and just do it, the more it will work, right? So, the other thing you're going to be considering is like, okay, great, grand, I got this. why am I targeting the far side of his neck? Why can't I just hit him directly? Strictly speaking, you can, right? There's no reason that I can't, from this hue, right, that I can't just go bop and be happy, right? I hit him, great, grand, whatever. He's not gonna enjoy that, right? It hits pretty quickly. But you've got to consider the possibility of an afterblow or things along those lines. By going for the far side of his neck, I actually can end up exerting pressure on him in a way that doesn't incline him to attack against me. So we'll show that real quick, right? So we're here, boom, scales, blah, blah, up, cut from below. When I get this against his head, he's getting pressure on 2 points right now. He knows this is scary, and his brain is still telling him, push this, right? This now locks up, so now him pushing down into my sword is pushing it into his neck, right? If he tries to alleviate that at all, I can just keep exerting pressure by raising up my sword. And you saw, since it's on his neck, it moves him very simply. So while the picture does seem to show you kind of stopping there, what more likely you're going to end up doing is you'll flow through it, just like everything else. So he winds, I wind, cut, through, and then exert pressure by taking a slight compass step backward after I've moved around. Now, the next big part about this in reading the text that really helps you do it and choose why to do it is it's almost a bit of a feint, right? Almost. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we go over the modern, quote unquote, modification for this, is that if everyone is doing this, high, low, high, people get really good at defending against that last high. So that means when I do my low, he's expecting me to just take off and go from above. So by staying on it, I'm changing what he expected, what I conditioned him to expect. But my footwork is exactly the same as if I was going to go high. So I'm deceiving him in both feeling and in regards to my body position. So his brain's getting conflicting information. Now, we'll throw on our masks, do that a couple times, and then we'll talk about the modern, quote-unquote, modification I have for it. Okay, I'll just step right here. That time I ended up hooking his arm by accident. That's A-okay. You're driving too far down. Nice suppression outward. There it is, right? And especially when you're, in gear or when the cut's coming for real, you may find different things, but that's A-okay, right? So now let's talk about a more likely parry that he's going to do. And that's another thing to consider is that in the later pictures of the Ausser, the guy who is getting hit by it seems to have returned to sort of this position. So let's talk about an alternate parry to the cut from below. So, personally, if I find someone trying to hew at me from below, right? So we come into here, boom, I wind against him, he winds, I'm like, and he cuts at me. I'm not going to try and suppress my short edge. Instead, I'm going to pass backwards and use my long edge by going into fluke, okay? This sets me up very nicely for trying to go over here and all that grand stuff, but it does not prevent any of the plays we just talked about from working. It just causes a little bit of modification on them. So we'll show that real quickly. So this time, rather than trying to suppress the short edge, Chase is just going to pass backwards and go into fluke. So step a little bit forward because you'll move a little bit further backward. So, boom, he winds, I wind, I step up, he cuts down against it. From here, if I feel that pressure, rather than hooking and pushing because of where he is, I often find that instead I like to unfurl and take that high hit instead. Because his point's going that way, I want to avoid it. This cross step already set me up really well. So both my limbs are crossed up. I'm just going to explode off of them and take the top of that head, right? So it just goes 1, 2, 3. And that's what I really enjoy about it is because you can actually stop doing, well, you can't stop, you should still keep it in mind, but I don't have to set this up via the wind and wind back. Instead, if I want to provoke this, what I'll often do is, rather than trying to cut into the scales, from the get-go, I'll just throw out a shield how, right? Or some sort of short edge cut, which prompts him to block like that. Cut from below, cut from above. 1, 2, 3. This is what I call the blitz, and it's super, super easy to do, right? So I'll throw on my mask a couple times, and we'll do that a couple times. Then I'll show how it doesn't really change the Ausser min. It actually makes the Ausser min easier. So this time, we're just standing out at distance. No problem. It feels exactly like a Zwerk. And thanks to that high-low-high, I can really prevent him from being able to launch a good attack back against me. His best option in that situation is going to be to try and catch that last cut, which because of how far I'm stepping to the side, since he'll end up usually in fluke, if he tries to parry that cut to the head, I can usually reach over it, which is why I'm springing so far to the side when I do it, and try and hit with the tip. That isn't always the case, but that's the ideal. So his better chance is to try and catch me when I come from below and he parries the fluke. But that just makes the Ausser min easier, right? So I come in with this first cut, boom, I cut from below, he meets it. That actually makes that super easy, right? Because now I have less of his blade to go around and I can just exert pressure. So now I'll show that with my mask on and then we'll be done. No problem whatsoever. It's gonna take a little getting used to, but when you nail it, it is so sweet. And if I clack him in the middle of the head, A-okay, still works exactly the same. But it does change up what he's gotten used to. And as we all know, mix-ups and things like that, once you condition the opponent, are really the key to being able to dominate any person you fight against. But for now, what we've gone over is the wind against the wind from above, that opportunity for thrust. Him raising and trying to defend himself, so we cut to the elbows with the stolen heel. He tries to defend himself, in which case we either come from above with a schnappen, or we ride through with the Ausser min. Either way though, those are the techniques I have for you this particular day. Happy 2021. Super excited to be back in the school and fresh new year of things. Hopefully it's better than last year. And thank you very much, Chase, for assisting me with this. And we'll go over some other techniques from Wallerstein another time.